2.0. Good morning, beautiful people. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. First of all, I just want to say what a great gift it is to be here. The Beyond Conference on the East Coast. I have wonderful opportunity to be with our friends and our kin in St. Louis, but to recognize that the beauty that was in that space is now the beauty that is in this space, and how we can be practitioners who are learning from one another. I don't take it lightly, especially in a season where our world can get very noisy, that I would be trusted with a microphone. Because every voice is not a voice that speaks light over us. Every voice is not a voice that is generative. Every voice is not a voice that honors the dignity and one another's humanity. So it truly is a great gift to be with you all, and so many fabulous people in this space that I know so well and absolutely love. Some of you, I stand on your shoulders, and so we are not going to I'm not going to be speaking to you. We get to speak with each other this morning. So as Brian shared, my name is Reverend Lisa Yebuah. I serve as the lead pastor of the Southeast Valley Table, which is a new faith community within the United Methodist Church in the North Carolina Annual Conference. So that means a hand sign in North Carolina. I like to say that I am a biscuit connoisseur, a 90s R&B connoisseur. You've got to be the 90s. That's the holiest moment of the night, the R&B. But more than anything, and I think this is what I want to share with you, is that I am a pastor who does not want people to settle on performing life as opposed to living life. The key anchor verse at the Southeast Valley Table is in John 10, verse 10, what Jesus says, "The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly." Our hashtag is life giving life. Recognize that when Jesus says that I have come that you may have abundant life, it is not abundant life once you die, everlasting life. It is that you would know the fullness of life in the here and now. When Jesus says that that the kingdom of God is at hand, so close that you can touch it, that we believe that when we walk this earth, that in between our sunrise and our sunset, we can know the overflow of joy and the overflow of peace and the overflow of glory. And in that, we can live compelling lives. And sometimes we have to paint a picture of compelling life so that people can put down the tools that do not serve them so that they might be clothed in glory. It matters to me the work that we are doing as practitioners in the church. Whether you are a lay person or you are a pastor or you work in some other role, we get this opportunity to help people be fashioned in the shape of the one comes that we may have life and life to the full, and then for that to be reflected in our human lives. So I offer what I want to offer in the spirit of that we get an opportunity to help leverage life-giving life in other people's lives. A couple of housekeeping things before I get into the meat of what we're going to talk about, and that is this. Everything I offer to you this morning is going to be done in a spirit of invitation and not instruction. Okay? So I might invite you to consider something. I might invite you to think about how something feels or looks or how you navigate something in your local church. But I'm not what to call myself an expert. I am continuously learning new things. I'm continuously having to lay down old things. The second piece that I want to fold around to in regard to our housekeeping rules, this is something that the church mothers, when I was growing up, would say, is eat the meat, spit out the bones. Eat the meat, spit out the bones. Meaning, everything that I say may not land, and that's okay. Eat the meat, spit out the bones. There's going to be something that you're going to hold on to that's going to be a gem for you. And you might say, you know what? I had an hour where I got to just kind of like sit around table with people that I enjoy. And that is perfectly okay. The reason why you can eat the meat and spit out the bones, you can take what you eat or not, is because the God of life is still in this place and you will not return empty. So I don't feel the pressure to make sure that you have something to leave here with. You can just say, "Push, you look nice in that big top. The glory below will reveal to you." This is the last one. And it has come from one of my friends by the name of Dr. Fatima Saleh. I would invite you to give me permission to be wrong. Or another way I might say that is give me the permission to grow. For pastors who are sitting in this space, many of us have gotten in our cars after a Sunday and we have preached a different sermon on the way home. And we've thought to ourselves, gosh, I wish that I had left this out, or maybe that I had transitioned in this particular way. It could be that 2 years from now, I feel very different about some of the information that I'm sharing with you. It could be that I feel different about this information because of the things that are happening in the world, or maybe the things that are happening within me, or the things that are happening within those that I love and I get to serve. So if in 3 years I write a book and it's like I'm saying that all this stuff I don't believe, I don't want you to say now, she told me in October. Might we all live the kind of lives we give ourselves permission to grow? So let me just share with you where we're going this morning. I'm going to tell you about the Southeast Raleigh Table, which is the church community that I serve. And I'm going to tell you about the kind of culture that we have created by God's grace in that space where we center the experience of BIPOC folk and persons of color, or another way of saying it, how we decenter whiteness in our space, even though we still are predominantly a white church. I'm going to talk through some of my learnings and ahas along the way, some of the questions that I had to ask myself or have been asked of our community, and where we now land and how we shape and fashion our practices. Then I have some reflection questions for you. You might have some reflection questions or some questions for me. Ryan and I will have the opportunity to field some questions. And then my new colleague, who will be your presenter in the afternoon, Reverend Gail Song Bantam. I'd like to say all three of her names. Reverend Gail Song Bantam. We will also meet the conversation a little bit later on. And so there will be an opportunity for this content to live beyond the page. There's this quote by Polly Berry that I want to share with you. And it says, "Hope is a song in a weary throat." Hope is a song in a weary throat. We are living through a time where many of us feel weary. Where the song of our hearts is, "How long, the Lord?" How long, O Lord, will our children have to learn drills to keep themselves safe in the classroom? How long, O Lord, will we broker literally the bodies of our queer kin in a world that oftentimes has to dehumanize the glory that is within? How long, O Lord, will individuals be snatched from the streets? How long? Our throats might be weary, and yet we hold on with a life-gripped hope. This is the work of the church. And so the things that we're doing with one another, the conversations that we're having with one another this weekend, please know that it's not for naught. But maybe it is to give us the kind of strength that we will keep on singing. We'll keep on singing. So because I'm going to tell you a bit about the Southeast Raleigh Table, I want you to get a glimpse of my church community. And so there's a very quick video that we're going to show you so that you can see my community in action.
Hello, friends. My name is Reverend Lisa Yebuah, and I serve as the lead pastor of the Southeast Raleigh Table. We're so excited to launch our 2024 generosity campaign called Nothing is Too Wonderful for God. In Genesis chapter 18, God tells Sarah that God's going to do something in her life that she believes is too good to be true. And Sarah laughs at God. And God's response to Sarah is anything too difficult for the divine. This statement of God speaks to the fact that God has the ability to work beyond and even greater than our human capacity and our abilities, that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than we could ever ask for or imagine.
My name is Malachi Garza. I use all the pronouns, and my favorite part of Southeast Raleigh Table has to be the radical love in action and truth-telling that helps me and those around me make sense of what are horrific times, and to sense make it with love at our center allows us to be joyful and hopeful in the most difficult conditions.
Since September 2016, the Southeast Raleigh Table has witnessed firsthand how God has not failed us. Our history is marked by key moments where we can name challenges and inequities that were not too difficult for God's power. The beauty is that God's faithfulness has not only been displayed in the operations of our church, but God's faithfulness has also been displayed in the lives and witness of the people who have committed themselves to Jesus and the mission and vision of the Southeast Raleigh Table.
My name is Brittany Robinson. I use she, her pronouns, and my God-sized dream for Southeast Raleigh Table is for us to truly live in abundance, that no dream is impossible, whether it's financial, the tangible things that our community inside these walls and outside may need, that we can achieve it. I truly believe that nothing is too wonderful for God.
Today's CERT is finally anchored in a neighborhood, and we find ourselves in a long-term location. We are excited for our future and sense more than ever that Jesus' promise of life-giving life can be reflected through our church community. We also know that it will require resourcing for us to show up well. This generosity campaign will allow CERT to realize its God-sized dreams. We believe indeed that nothing is too wonderful for God.
So is the hope that you would give to our generosity campaign, that could be one hope. The greater hope is that you would get a sense of the community that I get to serve. You'll notice that in this video, while you do get to see some glimpses within the actual church sanctuary, what also really matters is that you get to see glimpses of the parish. Because the parish and the context in which we are located helps us to think about the ways in which we as a church community are going to be community for one another, and also to how we choose to show up for one another beyond the four walls. Context matters. If you think about in John's gospel that the word becomes flesh and blood, which we'll talk about in one of the core values of the Southeast Raleigh Table, Jesus is contextualized in the incarnation. You get a glimpse of glory in the midst of context, to get a reflection of who we can be. Jesus offers up parables and speaks in stories that make sense for the people which Jesus moves among. Context matters. And so at the Southeast Raleigh Table, we're a parish-driven church, meaning that we make decisions based off of the people who live within the 1 to 2 mile radius around us. We're committed to the 27610 and 27601 zip codes. And the reason why those zip codes are important for me to share with you is because they hold stories. They hold stories of 2 HBCUs, Shaw University and St. Augustine's University. And the neighborhoods that were built around those particular neighborhoods, one post-Reconstruction and one in the early 1900s. In our community, we can tell the stories of Marian Anderson, the great opera singer, and W.E.B. Du Bois, when W.E.B. Du Bois came to St. Augustine's. We can talk about Anna Julia Cooper, one of the first Black women to write her own autobiography. We are in a context that shares the stories of Black resilience and Black joy of matriarchs and patriarchs upon whose shoulders we stand. So it matters that what we are doing within the four walls at the Southeast Raleigh table, that it doesn't seem ill-aligned or out of alignment with what is happening beyond the four walls at the Southeast Raleigh table. So our church community was incubated in 2014. We are actually a multi-site of Eaton Street United Methodist Church, though we are soon going to charter to become a standalone United Methodist Church. And in 2014, it was about a gathering of 25 people who would meet every other week. We would have a meal together, and every now and again, we would also serve together. On September 11, 2016, we had our first worship service. And we specifically chose that date so that we can understand our worship as a means of breaking in to the pain and the woundedness and the brokenness of this world, to say that there is something about this life-giving joy in Christ that is the final word, not destiny to us. We wanted to be the kind of church that had the voice and the spiritual muscles that when we were faced with struggle or challenges in the world, we thought of our worship as an antidote to what is happening. In 2016, we also had a free well-known election. And I have to say that the 2016 election pushed me to make it very clear what kind of pastor I was going to be in that season. Whereas in most of the other spaces that I had served as a pastor, I might have been able to kind of just like gloss over the election, maybe just pray for the country post-election. I needed to be a little more clear about who the Southeast Raleigh table was going to be in the midst of, after the 2016 election. How I needed to show up so that those who are in my community, who are oftentimes disenfranchised or marginalized by the world, did not feel as though they were invisible. Our church community leads into weekly sacramental practices, so either Eucharist or whatever we celebrate, a baptism, that everyone in our community will then remember their baptism on the Sundays. And the last thing that I would say is that we believe in embodied worship. So I say that we're like the best Black church, like liturgy with ways on a Sunday. But Sundays are not the only thing that make a church. There have to be other ways that people are shaped and understand themselves. And the Southeast Raleigh table also didn't start out with just having worship services. It was 2 years before we moved into a weekly worship rigor. And what I began to recognize is that if people are just left out to their own devices, they're going to be confronted by lots of forces and factors in this world that want to shape them. There are lots of forces and factors that want to tell people who they should be, and they might find themselves within a thwarted imagination of the empire. So it became important, even though we did not have a Sunday weekly rhythm, what were going to be the things that would actually shape this more diverse than the average United Methodist Church community. And it was core values. It was core values. So I'm going to walk really quickly through the 5 core values of the Southeast Raleigh table and tell you why it was important for these to become our canon, our boundary lines, the clothing that we wear. Our first core value is we show up. And this particular core value is a reminder to us that at John's gospel, that the word becomes flesh and moves into the neighborhood, as Eugene Peterson would say. It matters how we show up for each other in our worship experience. It matters how we show up with individuals when they're journeying through the valley of the shadow of death. It matters how we show up for each other when we want to rejoice with those who are rejoicing, and we're going to sit on the mourner's bench and mourn with those who mourn. It matters that in community that we show up. It also matters that we believe that God is nearer to us than even our next breath, that God shows up for us. That Emmanuel, who is with us, is still a God who can produce breakthroughs in our lives. That who we are today may not be who we are tomorrow. But the last dynamic of we show up is that the Southeast Raleigh, for those of you who are from Raleigh, Southeast Raleigh is a part of Raleigh that people, they whisper the name. You know this neighborhood, Southeast Raleigh. I never understand that. Why, you have to put your shoulder, Southeast Raleigh. You listen, Southeast Raleigh. But I have just told you about W.E.B. Du Bois and Marian Anderson and Anna Julia Cooper. I told you about the matriarchs and patriarchs that walked through the hallowed halls of St. Augustine's and Shaw universities. Yes. There are other matriarchs and patriarchs who live in our Southeast Raleigh community who need to have their lives honored and their humanity seen as also being beautiful. Yes, yes. Irregardless of the six census tracts that they live in. And so while in Raleigh, sometimes people think of Southeast Raleigh as being that part of Raleigh, what does it look like for us to also have a gracious and gentle posture within our community? Our actual church space is in a neighborhood that is quickly being gentrified. What does it look like for us to have a gentle and gracious posture? It didn't say that, the word became flesh and it tore up the neighborhood while dwelling among us. There was a gracious and gentle posture which Jesus took to show us what the glory of humanity could look like. So we showed up. You'll notice with all of the core values, there are three dimensions. One that helps us to understand our spiritual faith with God. One to understand within our community, kind of our horizontal relationships, and then also to how this is lived out with beyond the four walls. The second of our core values is our language is blessing. This is probably my favorite one. If you come to the Southeast Raleigh table, you're going to get your socks, your socks blessed off. You know what I mean. We're going to bless the socks off of you. That's it. It's early in the morning, friends, or feed with your coffee. You're going to get your socks blessed, the socks blessed on with you. Pray for you. Why? Because the last act that Jesus did with his disciples is that Jesus blessed them in Luke chapter 24. It says that Jesus raising his hands in Bethany blesses the disciples. And whatever Jesus said to the disciples must have been so good because it says that the disciples found melody and worship there. Can you imagine someone offering up such generous words over you that you don't know what else to do except just to receive them in a posture of worship? So that we too also need to be the kind of church community that is always blessing. We bless people when they come into the life of the church. We also bless people when they move. We have a blessing when individuals no longer feel like the Southeast Raleigh Depot was the right place for them. In 2020, we had individuals who felt stretched to the place of breaking based on how we were going to talk about anti-racism, the multiple pandemics that were happening through the world. And as a pastor, I had to get comfortable with this idea that I don't mind stretching you to the place of growing. But if you feel like you're being stretched to the place of growing, I'm not going to, you're being stretched to the place of breaking, I'm not going to stand in your way if you feel like God is calling you out to another place. However, even if you feel like you cannot journey with the Southeast Raleigh Table, we offer a blessing as you move on. 부지런히 blessing, a poem. Because their presence mattered. Even if it's not going to be for a lifetime in the Southeast Valley, for the time that they were with us. Yeah. So we blessed all of the time. And then, of course, because our community oftentimes is highlighted when there is a shooting or something that is not the most positive of news, what does it look like for us to also bless our community? This fashions our community to have the kind of posture as they're moving through Bali, to let your last word be a word of blessing. Yeah. I feel like if church folks blessed people, will not bless them out, but blessed people in real we might recapture in the imagination of our social skiers that Christians have wins at and are with some. That were people who, and not the bless your heart kind of blessing. But I'm always speaking something to you about what I see in you, the God goodness in you. Whether it's the person who makes your coffee because they're your favorite barista, what does it look like if your last word to them, like Jesus, is a word of blessing? You help mark my mornings with joy. Thank you for this cup of coffee. Our next core value is be disarmed with beauty. It says that Jesus is the reflection of glory. We also serve a created God who makes beautiful things out of dust. So it matters to us that our space feels inviting and hospitable. I'll say this, that beauty is not the same as opulence, and opulence isn't the same as beauty. Sometimes opulence can alienate people. If you've ever been to someone's house and you felt like, if I move too quickly, I want to knock over a porcelain sunpaint. Or I am not allowed to sit here, that can alienate. But something about beauty, it compels, it draws you in. Again, this matters so that as micro forms of hospitality, that people are always doing kind things for each other, just things for each other, wanting to make spaces more beautiful for one another. And then also for communities that typically get buildings built for function and utility. What does it look like to say, no, we want to discern with beauty, like we believe that people deserve to have beautiful things. Our next core values speak to the power of prayer. Jesus even slips away to pray. Hannah prays her heart out. But it is a reminder that the work that we do is always anchored in a spiritual movement. Before the bus boycotts, Martin Luther King Jr. asked that people everywhere pray for them. That they not forget that this is a spiritual movement. Prayer reminds us that it's not our genius, it's not our staff, it's not our resources, it's not even the numbers that come on a Sunday, but by the goodness of a God who never turns down the volume on our voices. And God acts the response if needed. So we pray for each other. And when things happen in our community that we cannot readily or easily fix, to recognize that maybe, as I preached not too long ago, we are allowed to reclaim the phrase thoughts of prayers, that we prayed in those moments, but we also move in the direction of our thoughts of prayers. Yeah. So our right action is aligned with what we hope for to believe for the people that we get to be and keep unity with. And then the last of our core values is that we think big. Jesus tells the disciples, you will do greater things in my name. I love this passage because the Greek word is dunamis. Jesus does some very amazing things in Scripture. But for Jesus to say, you will do greater things. Come on now. Yeah. Oh, how exciting to believe That people who sometimes wonder, is my life insignificant? And what is my purpose? And what is God doing in me and also through me? That we can proclaim, Jesus is going to whisper in your ear, you're going to do greater things in my name. Like your life will have impact. It will have overflow. It will be for the good and for the flourishing. We want to be statistic shifters at the Southeast Raleigh table. We want to be people who move in the face of all that the world says is, and we can say the world has it been, it's not the world as it should be. Bell Hooks has this beautiful quote, St. Bell Hooks has this beautiful quote where she says, to be truly visionary, one must root themselves in their present circumstances while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond those circumstances. That is the work of the church, that we live within the imagination of God and not the foreign imagination of the empire. Okay, why have I told you about these 5 core values? It's not because they're etched on our website or because it's important for us to do this on like a t-shirt or a bumper sticker, or for people to be able to somehow like on our anniversary, stand together and in unison, say the 5 core values together. No, that is not the beauty of the 5 core values. The beauty of the 5 core values goes back to what I said earlier, which is if we are not intentional and thoughtful about what is shaping people, something else will shape them. And these core values have actually helped us to become a particular type of community. The first thing that we began to see about what it looks like to be clothed in these values that all reflect something about who Jesus is for us and who Jesus is with us and who Jesus is within us, is that these values have led us to a place where we are deeply committed in practice and not only in word, into liberation and life-giving life. Where these core values have brought us to the kind of place that whoever is sitting in our seats on a Sunday morning, who is a part of our community or a friend of our community, knows that we believe that their body should be free in this world. Queer, black, poor, white, whoever you are, however you are known in this world, that life-giving life is your birthright. Because the core values aren't just words, but they're always attached to some type of practice, which means that it actually gets into the body. Mm-hmm. And when it gets into the body, it gets into the body. That the body begins to move as a body of liberation. The body begins to move in life-giving ways. Which means that if there's anything that comes as a threat to life-giving life, anything that comes as a threat to liberation, the body is like, something about this is not us. Or we need to course correct. Or we need to call ourselves in. Or we need to examine our practices that might shape us in a different way. The last thing that I wanted to also say You hear by people in the video talking about like abundance. Is that we have found a passion in the kind of way where we have an abundance mindset and not a scarcity mindset. This is important because in a church that is multi, we're going to make mistakes. It is going to get hard sometimes. Things aren't going to always be cute. There will be moments where we're going to have to funnel towards repair, where we're going to have to ask for forgiveness or extend grace. And if you live with a scarcity mindset that there is not enough grace to give or forgiveness to receive, we will not make it. But when you believe that the God of life is a limitless resource, is the enough for us to turn back to beyonda.network, even when things get challenging. For me to turn back into to God when I have not been my best self, or someone else has not been my best self. If you live in the scarcity mindset, every single challenge along the way will cause you to feel like you're going to be stuck perpetually. First is recognizing there is a way out. Not out of our own human capacity, but by God's grace, that God, who is the life source, can somehow lead us to another place. So we don't leave it up to chance how people are being shaped in our space. And that this, my friends, is, we're going to shift a little bit. So the church that Southeast Raleigh Table is predominantly white, or I would say dominant culture. It's predominantly white. However, it has more racial diversity than the average United Methodist church. We don't generally say, oh, we're a diverse church. I don't use those terms. I feel more comfortable, as Reverend Gelson Bantam and I will chat about, using the term being multi. So we live at the intersection of multiracial identities and ethnicities, gender expressions, sexual identities, abilities, and then intergenerational. And then many people live at the intersection of multiple of those identities. So our core values give us a way of moving together, of understanding life, giving love. And trying to be a multi-church that is healthy and that is vibrant, because diversity should not be a means to an end, as we're going to talk about for just a little bit. Whether it is in the core values or if in the way in which you think about the cultural texture of a church like the Southeast Raleigh Table, you have to know what you are leaning into so that you can also name what you're leaning out of. So there's 3 things that I want to share with you that I have learned in the Southeast Raleigh Table. The first one is that proximity does not equal intimacy. So proximity does not equal intimacy. I want you to think about families. Everyone in a family isn't necessarily close. And I think there are times in multi-spaces or diverse spaces where individuals believe if you just put people in the same space together, if they're proximate to each other, that will create intimacy with each other. If that were so, the plantations would have been, you could be proximate to a person's body. That does not necessarily mean that it's generative, what that proximity looks like. Which means that if the diversity in the space is not disrupting how you understand life with one another, it will look like a very thin or false vision of unity. So having to confront the moments when being proximate to each other actually is uncomfortable has become important. There was a season in the Southeast Raleigh Table where most of the members of our worship team were Black. And on Sunday mornings, worship team, absolutely fabulous, wonderful. If in the congregation, the majority of individuals are white. And let's say not because they're not enjoying the music or being open to what God is up to in the midst of worship, but let's just say that folks are a little more static in the ways in which they are responding with the worship team. That's my nice way. That picture can actually mirror a not so beautiful reflection of the diversity in space. There was a time in American history where individuals who were white couldn't be in spaces with individuals who were black if those who were black were performing or offering a service to them. Now, I don't believe that anyone comes to the Southeast Raleigh table believing that that's what's going to, like, I don't think that that's like the sense that people have. But they can mirror that. So recognize, like, oh yeah, you're going to talk about this. Now that doesn't mean that now you begin to mimic or feel like you've got to start worshiping in a way that doesn't feel like aligned or congruent, but it does mean that we have to like name the thing. If we're going to really be in community with each other, we have to like name the thing. Like this is feeling challenging for the worship team. Or it might feel challenging for a person who might have grown up in a more a cathartic expression of worship and feels like, oh, someone's going to like hush them. Like how do we broker those particular movements? That proximity does not automatically equal intimacy. Here's the other thing. Is that we had to be very clear that race is always on the table. Listen, else people get exhausted talking about race. But race is always on the table. It's actually one of our guiding principles. Now, you notice that it doesn't say anti-racism is always on the table. Although we are an anti-racist church and we lean in those directions. The reason why we say race is always on the table is because within the United States, every single system that we live in, every single system institution was somehow built around the notion of racialized identity. And so it is important that every single person who comes to the Southeast Raleigh table recognizes that their racial identity matters within a macro narrative. And also to run as a micro narrative. It's also the way in which we are very honest that white supremacy has done a doozy on all of us. Now, while white supremacy affects Black and brown and people of color in very poignant ways, because I'm looking at this room and I'm going to assume some things about many of your racial identities. White supremacy has also done a doozy on those of you who are white-bodied. Yeah. If we say that we believe in liberation in all of its forms, if we say that we want all people to be free, that means everyone within the context of the Southeast Raleigh table, white-bodied or not, has to know the ways in which they have been kept far away from themselves. So race, not just beyond you, but also within you, what has happened to you. How to understand yourself within a greater structure. What happens to you if you had to hear a family member or a friend or a person that you clubbed or that raised you use incredibly harmful language about people of color? You might be simple like, where has that landed in my bones and my sinews that I don't know? Race is always on the table, and you'll talk about this a little bit later, but for persons of color, we can't opt out of thinking about our racialized identities. So this can be very challenging for individuals who are white bodied. And yet there's a beautiful and very compelling reality for individuals who are white bodied as well, to take back what has been taken from them. I say that carefully because, but also too for you to get to claim your humanity beyond a construct that was used to wield power over and not power with. So to divest yourself with that, then you have to also know what is shaped and what is shaped you. One of my former colleagues, who is a woman who is white, once said to me, Lisa, I have brambled now with what it looks like for me to have privilege. But I realize that privilege is not the same thing as having liberation. If we want people to be, we want all people to be free. The last thing that has been an aha is my latest finding is that for individuals to have healthy relationships beyond themselves, with others who have different lived experiences than the one that you might have, is that folks have to be doing their own work. They have to be a friend in themselves before they can be a friend to others. So certainly we have affinity groups. Right now we have 3 affinity groups. We have an affinity group for our queer kin. We have an affinity group for our BIPOC folk at the Southeast Raleigh table, and then we have an affinity group for those who are occupied bodies. And in those particular groups, healing work is done. Fun is had. Community is being made. People get to connect with themselves around their similar and shared experiences, and even have to have challenging conversations about sometimes the things within our own respective communities that can cause us to not be good to one another or to be good to ourselves. Now, the affinity groups, generally, there's going to be someone who's like, well, why happen? Well, how is this not segregation? And then we'll respond with like a 45-minute video and some conversation about, because generally the instinct is this is certain, like we need to be doing things together. We need to be doing things together. And then I remind them the proximity does automatically equal intimacy. And that this is a way in which you are showing up for yourself, so you can show up well for other individuals. Because the love community is not about any people in the same group. It's about you also living for a deep place of healing, of learning to love your whole self, not just the empire-shaped imagination of yourself, not the self that has been built by constructs. And we need safe space to talk about that. We also need space where we don't ask people to do our emotional labor for us, which oftentimes happen in spaces when you put diverse people in a room with them. Zorina First wrote, "Love makes the soul crawl out of its hiding place." And so the question we might ask anyone is, how can you truly love me if you do not know what it is to truly love yourself here? My courage once said to me, you cannot take people farther than where you are willing to go. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If I'm not thinking about what I am divesting from or what I'm investing in, if I'm not thinking about where I have sipped from the cup of white supremacy, if I am not thinking about the ways in which I have comported myself, but then I'm talking about, oh, we're going to be a vibrant, healthy, full-time church, I will not be able to take people any farther than where I am. With all of these ahas, it comes back to, and this is the thesis, friends. When you center, in an evangelical space, when you center BIPOC folk, or another way of saying this is when you decenter whiteness, you create the kind of safe space that becomes generative for diverse and multi-spaces. And the grace that I have learned is that I had never considered that all the other spaces that I have served, which have all been predominant and white, the great gift that would have been if I had decentered whiteness in those spaces. As a means and a pathway of liberation for the people that God called me to serve, even in the absence of others like people of color, or even the taxes of the people of color. So one of my great confessions, and also one of my, I don't know that I want to say it's a regret, but something that I do sometimes feel very remorse, is that I aided in the non-formation of people by not oftentimes challenging how whiteness also had been ignorant. And I'm moving the direction of centering that for the sake of whatever we felt was familiar or was our day. Versus believing that all of us have something that we can divest from. That just having a black pastor is not the means to liberation. But that all of us can get free. If we had the Brice Gidon's quote, I wanted to share this, and then I've got some questions for you all. Chris Lee Ball's says this: to make a revolution, people must not only struggle against existing institutions, they must trade a philosophical and spiritual leap and become more human beings. In order to change or transform the world, they must change and transform themselves. Though one thing that I would shift is to say that that transformation and that changing within the self is not up to our own human capacity, but also to by God's grace. But this idea of becoming human beings is actually the key, that we become the site of God's liberation. We become the site of God's glory. We become the site of God's grace. We become the site of God's love. We become the site of God's power. Something about our stories becoming the site is what creates change beyond ourselves for institutions and organizations in this world that is so filled with chaos. How do we trust? How do we trust that personal transformation, that spiritual transformation, that holistic transformation for all of us might create a kind of world that is within the imagination of God? So here are some questions I would love for you to sit with and to chat with those around your table. I'd love to know, how do you approach race in your context? This question might belong, do you talk about race when there is a racially charged incident? Or do you talk about race in regards to all of our racialized identities, for instance?
So I sure would love to know how do you normally approach race and gore in your context?
I see you all as practitioners, which means that you have influence. And I'd love to know, do you consider yourself to be a friend to yourself? Or maybe a way you could ask this question, are you afraid to yourself? Yes or no is, what is the work for me to do? Where do I need to think about how I become a more human being? What do I need to divest from? What do I need to invest in? Going back to what my therapist says, which is, if you are a practitioner who is wanting to create or curate or hold space for a church that looks diverse or that is multi, then we have to remind ourselves, I cannot take people farther than where I am. So what is the work for me to do? And then either for yourself or for your community or context is to consider one healing practice that you can cultivate in your community. Meaning, what is an embodied way that we can think about this conversation about diversity, equal tide, or even the work that we all have to do around our racial healing. The temptation is to make headwork. If you just read a lot of books, which is true. Like I think one of a great challenge for the church might be that we are the griots, that we tell the stories, that we tell the story rightly, the MAGA story, that we tell history in a way that has all of its weight and its bumps and its bruises and its oppression and its ugly cases and spaces, because we're also in the church deeply invested in these two things called confession and repentance, which means that we can tell our history and know that we could turn another way. Yes. So we don't have to create myths. We can sit with stories, because the God of life invites us to come back another way. Yes, I believe that it's important to read the books and to know the things, but sometimes the work has to be done in a way that it gets to your bones and your sinews. So what is the healing work? Consider what healing practice to cultivate. Maybe it is within your space. Within your space, you are willing to speak and to name the things that keep you far away from yourself. That you're willing to name the ways in which empire does you become, as my friend Reverend Donna culturally battle would say, a mercenary of the empire. And you name them, and then we say, no, Lord, would you have a better way for us?
Well, thank you all for the message you tried. And thank you to Lisa for the words you brought us to listen. Gratitude is something to share, so let's give people with gratitude while we're together. And when we go forward, also speaking of gratitude, I just noticed that there were friendoms on the tables, so none of your enjoyment has. It changed my morning. I feel like I had a debate or something, but I still did it. So, it's a little thing, it's not time. So I hope these bronze sparked meaningful conversation at the tables. I know that they did, based on what we've been hearing here together. But we want to broaden that conversation a little. And maybe you had something to rise to the top that you think would be helpful for group, but more importantly, just questions that you might have for Lisa based upon what the Lord was leading for her again this morning. And her experience at Southeast Raleigh Table in another way. So we're going to go to some Q&A now. Kevin's plugging around with the other mic, and let's bring our questions for Lisa.
You'll be here for a while.
Hey, Lisa. We're going to start with the first question. Hey, Lisa. So we talked about this as the final words of the gathering, but I'm an institutional person. I work for Medieval Conference. How do you incorporate what it means to be United Methodist at Southeast Raleigh Table?
Yes. Is this, Perfect. One, we do name the fact that we're a United Methodist Church. Our sacramental life is probably the way in which I think we reflect who we are as Wesleyans, and that we are a community of constant communion. And I thought that was really important for us as a VK community. Oftentimes, there's this idea that we are going to veer from some of the roots of who we are as United Methodists versus what does it look like to, as Dr. Willie Jensen said, improvise, like to allow like new wind within the things that we're doing. So I oftentimes say that we are a community who lives with a liturgy with wings. So the basic flow of the worship service looks very similar to what I submitted before the Board of Ordaining Ministry. But I might share why we might utilize certain parts of the Great Thanksgiving in a way that makes sense for whatever is happening in the life of the world or the life of the congregation. But there's not this kind of like backhandling for that. Also, in regards to the ways that we are. The ways that we're also organized. So, for instance, I have what you would know as a church council. It used to be called our culture keepers. I still call it a church council. Early on in the life of the church, those who were in leadership positions were our culture keepers. That's what I call the church council. Now we call it our leadership team. Again, organized like most United Methodist churches, so that when I turned in my church conference forums, there was like, who's this? It may be that I use a language, a lexicon that settles well within a community that I'm from.
Saying more about using multi-conceptors. Give me a little more on all the doors. So the courts elections.
Sure. Actually, I had my colleague, Barbara Gilson-Bantam, is the person who, when I needed to brainstorm or think for things or have someone to sit on the borders bench with me or to sit in space where we could dream together, Gail's the person that I would call that. And Gail uses the frame Old Tie to talk about the church community that she led. The reason why I have generally strayed away from diversity is because, at least in our socio-political frame, we sometimes will call a space diverse if it has the presence of any 1, 2, or 3 individuals who are together. So early on, I would say we have more diversity than the average United Methodist Church. I'm going to use that term because that is familiar to folks. However, I would invite you to ask someone, is the person of color or we hold some other identity other than white body, if they think our church is diverse.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the term ally. Like, yes, I could call myself an ally all day, but whoever I'm advocating for, they need to knight me the ally.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So that's the only reason why I just think sometimes in our social frame, diversity just looks like as long as we have some variation that's not white, it still kind of centers. We have a diverse team, and you have Lisa. You know, you got a diverse staff, and it's just Lisa. That's the reason why multi actually holds that even within a space that you might consider to be homogeneous, there still might be multi. Multi takes seriously that you make space. Multi takes seriously that you literally get your sections. At least, I think that word is a little more expansive in our social.
So you talked a little bit about proximity does not equal intimacy. So the church I serve has some multi. We have a small Hispanic congregation. We have a handful of people of color. We have a handful of folks who are LGBTQ. But how do you foster intimacy because one of the things we're struggling with is separateness while also being together.
Yeah. So, I kind of want to go back to this idea of Dinebi. What is Dinebi, or what is Dinebi? We're still trying to figure out what it is to be a community with each other. Again, just being in this, like you all coming into this space, you might have certain similar experiences. Like you're coming here for a particular reason, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to lead as a community. So sometimes it's okay to name, like it will take time. I think I look back sometimes to the early days of the Southeast Raleigh table. It's really important for me to do that, to remind myself that where we are today is not where we were 5 years ago. There were times when we just had to name, like it's going to take a while for us to feel like that we're really doing this thing together versus it's always an experiment every single time that we gather. I also want to go back to the reality of what does it look like to be a friend to oneself, and to name that, to ask yourself this question, and that is, how often do the people that I get to care for and serve who are part of, sit under this group of this church, how often do they live at the intersection with one another beyond this space? So early on, and then with the Southwest Raleigh Table's history, there were two things that we thought was really, really important. The first was to invite anyone who became a member at the Southeast Raleigh Table or who was a worshiper at the Southeast Raleigh Table to attend the Phase 1 workshop of the Racial Equity Institute. Because we needed, before we started taking up causes or speak out of different things, we needed to figure out that we all were using the same language whenever we said any particular word. When we said race, so we all know what means by that. But that helped us to have a common understanding of how we all find ourselves in this story based on our social relations. Was to do this, and we would decay. We would have scholarships. We thought it was that important that if you're going to be a member here, we want to have the shared understanding of why we're doing this thing, and it's not just that we can take good pictures at Easter. And we're going to reflect the very threat to the empire and the way in which we say, oh no. We can live at the intersection of one's identities and not either subject one to oppression or one rise to the top, or however it may be. So I would say that might be a thing. The other might be, what does it look like to create connection beyond Sunday morning worship? So our earliest days at Surf, we did a lot of tailgating at homecomings. We did a lot of porch parties. We do a lot of parties and a little more parties. But in ways in which people's bodies are a little more habituated to actually connecting with one another.
Hi. Okay, I just wanted to offer something to suggest to illustrate. We were talking about that there, wishing for picture. Or did you kind of radiate after a bishop that homeslayed consecration? You figure it's the church. So we have the bottom, just to get rid of that and the word freedom. It is nourished, and it's brought up by a bishop when he acknowledged the territory on which he sets in. That one's out. And I hate what you said. Canada, they've done this huge epic and offered reconciliation for British peoples. That apology, Yebuah calls, has not that such on hers. Canada now has proof that they're serious about apology and take away for your reconciliation. I really think that it's important with our churches where we extend that thought beyond just, and I got you remember, beyond race to First Nations people, and then, as my common hero, my friend here, you would put away.
said we need to acknowledge the codes we have as Americans. Well, what's that doing to people who are not Americans? So just off that,
There's a lot of work, but all of us do, we get it done. Racial work, there's so much so.
Two really quick things I just want to say with both this question that you asked and also to your comment is, in a 45-minute, very quick overview of the Southeast Valley table, it can sometimes seem like reflecting dynamics around race. And you brought up a really beautiful point, which is this is why this conversation has to continue and the work has to continue beyond these four walls, is because race as construct, race or the context of the United States, race as we understand it on a global in regards to colonialism, imperialism, is incredibly complex. You often just don't have enough space to get into all of the complexity, but please know by all means, I'm not trying to reflect the dynamics to make it a binary or a dichotomy. It's way more complex. Again, the whole time. I also just want to come back to your question around like how do you create intimacy? Is I want everyone to feel it deep within themselves. What I'm wanting to say that is to really have a healthy, diverse or multi-space. You got to be in for the long haul. Like it may not happen actually in 2-3 years of like finding like a certain rhythm of how you're doing life together. It truly is like the resiliency in patience. The resiliency of community. We say that we go slow so that we can go deep. And we're okay with that. We go slow so we can go deep.
Evangelizer, I thank you so much. Do you have an example of an effective or ineffective way of decentering whiteness in ministry context? I'm going to take a good example. Goodness, why is my brain tap on a robot? I'll look at my friend Dale. Because
Maybe in the way that you address something that's happened to you wrong.
Okay, yeah, that's
Or your
good.
stature when you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I would say that like here's one. So after this November election, we actually had 2 worship services, and we had our Sunday morning worship service, and then we had a Sunday evening worship service. And the Sunday morning worship service, it came with it came with an energy. But I actually said at the beginning of the sermon, in this I am not centering those who are dominant culture. For Black women in this space, or those who are Latin, for those who I needed to be very clear about the invitation that I wanted to offer up for the community. So I actually said, for some of you, you can receive it how you want to receive it, but this is like an invitation. This is an invitation for this particular. So sometimes I'll actually say, I need a center these ears in this service. Then later on in the evening, we had a BIPOC worship service. And again, it's not about like, oh, we got to keep people separate or that we don't all have something to carry. Because the sermon that I preached in the morning, I could have also asked those questions of myself. But it would have felt like I was asking those who are already holding a lot to now have to hold more. So that we were very clear that the evening was to be in some ways like a hush harbor for members within our community who are persons of color. Even though, so when I talk about whiteness, please note that it's not about being a person who is white. And another thing we say at CERC in reverse to Teresa is that we never use shame as a strategy. And if you are ever in the class that uses shame as a strategy, the shame as a strategy for transformation, run in the opposite direction. Shame is a liar. It says that Christ died to abolish condemnation and shame. We don't use shame as a strategy. So let me just say that. So whiteness as a construct, even the way our leadership team, we used to say this, that we seek not to be hierarchical, but collaborative. So sometimes the functions of the construct, it's not about the people, but the functions of the construct. This might be the way in which we effectively move in the opposite direction, that we are very mindful of even how these. We could take on other models that aren't Western. And they'd be effective. And you'd be surprised how everyone can flourish in those models. We don't use Robert's Rules of Order. I know that's done big events. But we do ours. Because then not to say that that's, okay.
So.
And I don't want to, that's not to vilify, right? Not say, but it is to contextualize that not actually be more alienating than generative. And you're the great discerners in your community of what's generative, what is in service to people, what is sometimes might be in service to our survival, but not to our flourishing. Or what might be in service to our survival and also our flourishing. And so I want to be very mindful that at CERT, at the Southwest Raleigh table, there are certain things that we lay down in order to center, decenter.
Right. Thanks, Susan. That's our time. Appreciate you saying that.